The judge and the officer, a turning point. Have you ever been stopped just for looking suspicious, then frisked and humiliated, treated like a criminal for no reason other than your skin color? That's what happened to an ordinary man, or so the police officer thought. He didn't know the suspect was a federal judge. In minutes, this officer would face the weight of his own arrogance. It was 1 p.m., sun beating down on a black car in an upscale neighborhood. Inside, Richard Costa, 42, a federal judge, was calmly heading home from court. He wore a dress shirt, tie loosened, suit jacket in the back. Jazz played softly. This was his time to breathe. His discreet executive car reflected his personality, reserved, balanced, firm. Richard had no idea a police cruiser had noticed him. 2 officers inside were talking. That car doesn't fit the profile. Let's see what he's doing here. No justification, no complaint, no traffic violation, just prejudice disguised as suspicion. The cruiser accelerated, siren lights flashing. Richard glanced in the rearview mirror and felt his stomach churn. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he knew what was coming. He took a deep breath, retrieved his license and documents. He'd been a federal judge for almost 10 years in black since birth. He knew how the world worked. He calmly pulled over, rolled down his window, and turned off the music. The officer was already approaching, hand on his holster. Documents and license, now! He demanded, no greeting. Richard handed them over calmly. Good afternoon, officer. Was there an irregularity? The officer took the papers disdainfully. Whose car is this? He asked, as if it couldn't possibly be Richard's. It's mine. It's in my name. You can check. The officer barely looked, preferring his instinct. Where are you going? What do you do for work? Richard took a deep breath. Sir, are these questions really necessary? The officer frowned. Richard's polite tone irritated men used to subservience. I asked the questions here. Now get out of the car. Richard hesitated, knowing the treatment would change. He got out slowly, hands visible, looking the officer in the eye. May I know the reason for this stop? The officer smirked. You seem pretty confident, don't you? Let's see if that lasts. The sun's heat no longer bothered Richard. What burned was the old script of discrimination. But the officer was making a fatal mistake. He was underestimating the man in front of him. Richard stayed by the car, arms visible, calm posture, the calm of someone who'd learned to survive daily distrust. But the officer wanted submission, not cooperation. Turn around, hands on the car, he ordered. Richard obeyed, knowing a wrong word could mean a false report or worse. The officer frisked him, not technically, but as a power play. He shoved Richard's shoulders, his hands rough, violent. Nervous? Got something to hide? Richard replied calmly, I'm calm. You're just abusing your authority. This hit the officer's ego. He stepped back, looking for an audience. Across the street, people watched. An old woman with bags, a delivery driver, a driver discreetly filming. The humiliation was public, but no one intervened, fearing they'd be next. The officer pointed at Richard's car. Is this really your car? Did you borrow it? Richard looked over his shoulder. It's on the document in my name. The officer smirked. But you understand a car like this in an area like this attracts attention, right? There was the naked truth. The problem wasn't the car. It was who was inside it. The officer looked at the document again, still not seeing the title, too focused on his prejudice. What do you do for work again? Richard replied firmly, I'm a public servant for the Federal Justice Department. The officer scoffed. A public servant. Huh? What kind? Cleaner? Driver? The racism was blatant, intentional. Richard maintained his gaze, but inside, something boiled. Not hatred, but the weight of another injustice, another abuse. He knew he couldn't let this be just another bitter memory. The officer walked around the car, peering inside, trying to find a reason for arrest. Nothing. When he returned, he held out his hand. Documents again. I'm going to register this. It was then, as he finally read the full name printed on the car with attention, that everything changed. The officer's gaze trembled. His eyes scanned the document again, slower. Richard Costa, federal judge. The officer's body froze, brain processing the blunder. In that absolute silence, the man who thought he was above everything began to sink. The sun remained relentless, but now it was the officer sweating. He held Richard's license with trembling hands, rereading, searching for an error that would save him. But there it was, judiciary power of a union, federal judge Richard Costa. The arrogance evaporated. The sarcastic laughter gave way to terror. Richard watched in silence. Not vengeance, but confirmation. The uniform, once a threat, was now stained with shame. "Sir, I apologize. There was a mistake." The officer stammered, returning the document with shaking hands. "Oh, really?" Richard replied calmly. "And in what part exactly?" "When you frisked me without reason. When you insinuated this car couldn't be mine. Or when you asked if I was a cleaner." The officer tried to laugh. I was just doing my job. Your Honor, your job is to discriminate, humiliate, or disrespect the Constitution?" Richard's tone was sharp but contained. It was a sentence. The officer stepped back, eyes searching for his patrol car. "Sir, can we resolve this here between us without a scandal?" Richard gave a half-smile. "Ah, you want silence now? After turning my dignity into a spectacle?" The delivery driver was filming. The old woman, too. Other drivers had stopped. The street was watching the live downfall of a man who thought he was untouchable. Then Richard took 2 steps back, pulled out his phone, and dialed. The officer's eyes widened. "Sir, what are you doing?" "Your job brought me here. Now I'm going to do mine." He put the phone to his ear. "Good afternoon. This is Federal Judge Richard Costa. I am in an irregular, racist, and abusive police stop. I request the immediate presence of Internal Affairs and a public ombudsman delegate. The location is Parati Street, South Zone." The officer turned pale. "Your Honor, this will ruin my career." Richard hung up. "No, you ruined your own career. I'm just going to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Silence returned. Justice was coming. The atmosphere on the street transformed. The officer, minutes ago in charge, now seemed like a defendant surrounded by witnesses, phones recording, gazes cutting like blades. Richard stood firm, knowing something bigger was happening. The mask of abuse had fallen. He simply waited, knowing he'd activated a system that could work. The officer paced, muttering, sweating, nearly tripping. He knew his career was on the line, and he'd sharpened the blade himself. Then, familiar sounds approached. Internal Affairs and Ombudsman patrol cars parked. Men and women in uniform, others in suits with clipboards. The law had arrived, but not to protect the officer. Richard crossed his arms. From an official car, the Ombudsman delegate, a short, bald man with a direct gaze, approached and greeted Richard with respect. "Your Honor, we received your request. We are ready to hear and record everything." The officer was static, trembling, mouth dry. And then it happened. As Internal Affairs approached him, the officer took 2 steps back, took a deep breath, and collapsed. He simply crumpled, as if the weight of his arrogance, abuse, and impunity had overcome him. A dry thud echoed. People were shocked. "He fainted," someone whispered. An Internal Affairs agent checked his vitals. "He's conscious, but had a drop in blood pressure. We'll take him for medical attention." The officer was carried away like a burden, dead weight from a rotten system. Richard remained standing, serene, not for vengeance, but for justice. The ombudsman delegate turned to Richard. "Do you want to file the complaint personally, or would you prefer we handle everything?" Richard looked at the faces around him, black, white, young, old, all saw, all felt. "I will file it personally, and I will follow the process to the end, because this time it won't be swept under the rug." As the officer was placed in the medical vehicle, the entire street seemed to stop. The world was watching the live downfall of a symbol of uniformed arrogance. Richard was calm, his eyes sharp. He didn't just want that man to pay. He wanted the entire system to hear him. The next call was crucial. He pulled out his phone and dialed a direct line to the Regional Federal Court. "Hello, Institutional Security Secretary. This is Federal Judge Richard Costa. I need the Public Prosecutor's Office to be notified about an urgent matter." After a pause, a firm response. Yes, sir. What is the nature of the case? Richard took a deep breath. Racism, abuse of authority, attempted illegal coercion, and undue exposure. Protocol initiated. Within minutes, the public prosecutor's office was notified. The military justice court opened an automatic inquiry. The officer's name was flagged for immediate investigation. A routine stop was now a federal scandal. Inside a patrol car, the officer regained consciousness, but his gaze was no longer arrogant. It was panic, regret, desperation. He knew his colleagues wouldn't protect him now. No camaraderie, no cover-up. The system wouldn't protect him. It would swallow him. An internal affairs agent entered the car. Full name, Carlos Brenner. Carlos, are you aware of the accusations against you? I didn't know who he was. The agent looked up, and if he were to judge, would the approach have been different? Carlos Brenner lowered his gaze. The silence was his confession. Outside, Richard walked to the ombudsman delegate and two prosecutors who had arrived. We will formalize a complaint on behalf of the public prosecutor's office and forward copies to the CNJ and the military police. Richard nodded. I want him not only to be dismissed, I want him to be banned, and for this to become a national precedent. The prosecutor nodded. After today, it will be. Social media was already buzzing. The video of the officer's collapse, the judge being respected, the historic turning point, millions of views. The tables have turned. Today, Brazil saw what real justice is. This video should be shown in every police academy. Richard received messages of thanks from all over, but he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Within 24 hours, Carlos Brenner was the face of national shame. The images spread like wildfire. Videos on TikTok, trending hashtags, hashtag justice for all, hashtag racism has consequences, hashtag black judge resists. News reports highlighted the shocking fact. If he weren't a judge, he probably would have been arrested or assaulted. How many black men go through this every day and don't have a robe to protect them? A TV presenter asked. Then the public joined in. A petition demanding Carlos's dismissal and ban from public service surpassed 2 million signatures in 3 days. The pressure was unsustainable. Carlos was formally deposed before an internal affairs commission. He entered like an ex-officer, civilian clothes, eyes downcast, handcuffed. Richard was present, not as judge, but as victim and the voice of thousands. The prosecutor opened the proceedings. Mr. Carlos Brenner is accused of irregular approach, racist conduct, abuse of authority, and attempted illegal coercion. There is video evidence, witnesses, and indirect confession. How do you plead? Carlos tried to speak, voice failing. He whispered, regretful. Richard looked at him coldly. Regret doesn't erase the pain or the humiliation. But if this pain served to change history, then it will have been worth it. It was the beginning of an irreversible, public, and necessary downfall. Carlos Brenner didn't sleep. The walls of internal affairs closed in. Notifications confirming inquiries, immediate suspension, public hearing for dismissal. He knew there was nowhere to run. In the internal affairs hearing room, the environment was solemn, the official end of a man's career. Richard was present with human rights groups, the Bar Association, and the National Commission for Racial Equality. The case was now about a system taking a historic step. The Inspector General spoke. After complete analysis, this commission has unanimously decided to dismiss and definitively ban this servant from the military police. Carlos tried to speak, but was interrupted. Furthermore, we recommend his disqualification from any public office in any sphere. The silence was heavy, irreversible. Carlos Brenner was officially banned from the uniform, from public structure, from the privilege of impunity. Outside, Richard faced reporters. He took a deep breath. This man wasn't punished for who I am. He was punished for who he is. A journalist asked, "Do you believe this case will change anything?" Richard replied, "It will change because this time the system worked. Because there was a camera, there was proof, there was reaction, and most importantly, there was courage." The banishment video went viral again, a symbol of justice. Today is a historic day. The cycle of impunity suffered a real blow. In the following week, 4 other cases were reopened. Internal Affairs created a channel for racial profiling complaints, and a new directive was issued. Any officer accused of racism with proof would be suspended until formal judgment. It was just a beginning, but a new chapter. Days later, Brazil still talked about the case. The racist officer was banned, humiliated, exposed. But the true impact was just beginning. Richard Costa, once known only in legal circles, became synonymous with resistance, dignity, and justice. Invitations poured in, interviews, debates, lectures. But Richard wasn't swayed by fame. His mission wasn't complete. He proposed to the National Council of Justice an audacious plan, a national police approach protocol focusing on civil rights, mandatory anti-racist training, and a public database of institutional racism complaints. Not revenge, but legacy. I don't want to be remembered as the judge who made a police officer faint. I want to be remembered as the man who helped break this cycle, he said in a widely shared interview. Meanwhile, Carlos Brenner disappeared. No public statement, no defense. The national shame weighed more than any conviction. His appeal attempts were filed away. The door closed forever. The case became a documentary. The day justice wore the black robe. Richard's final words of the hearing were watched over 20 million times. Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be your son, your father, your neighbor. And if we don't fight for justice now, when will it be? Richard returned to his routine, but he was never just a judge again. Now he was a symbol, shield, voice. Wherever he went, black men greeted him with a different look. The look of those who knew someone up there still remembered what it was like to live down here. This story holds immense power, doesn't it? It's a stark reminder of the realities of racism and the importance of accountability.